It took me 10 years to build a quiet life after the foster homes, and 1 minute to watch it go up in smoke. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, I did it. I found Maya and brought her home from the group shelter, I said, clutching the adoption papers like a miracle. Then Ava, my picture-perfect sister with the perfect smile, yanked the folder from my hands and screamed, "Thief!" By the time security rushed in, the study in the Whitmores' New York townhouse was already a swirl of flames and accusations, aimed at me. She did it. She started the fire. "She tried to kill me," Ava cried. I hadn't even lit a match. What I said next would make everyone in that room choose a side. I knew the Whitmores long before they knew me. I cleaned their Upper East Side penthouse for rent money, ate $1 pizza for dinner, and slept on a pull-out in Queens. I loved Liam Whitmore in the hopeless way a housekeeper loves the air she fetches coffee for. Quiet, steady, never out loud. When the flames broke, he stared at me like a stranger. "Brooklyn, tell me the truth," he said. He always called me by my borough, not my name. "I didn't do this," I whispered. He looked over my shoulder at Ava, who was already crying into Mrs. Whitmore's arms. And that was the moment I realized love without trust is just a pretty story with a bad ending. A month later, I walked out of the women's facility in Rikers, 1 year served after a plea that my court-appointed lawyer said would make it all go away. It didn't. It tattooed my name with the word felon and handed Ava the narrative she wanted. Saintly daughter saved the family. Jealous maid burned it all down. The only thing keeping me upright was the letter I'd gotten from the hospital. My partial liver donation had taken the recipient stable. I never signed my name on that one. I didn't need thanks. I just needed him to live. What I did next would rip the Whitmores' fairy tale in half. Brooke Myers in the hospital, Damien, the family driver, said when he found me bussing tables at a diner off 10th Avenue. Ava collapsed during rehearsal dinner prep. He handed me a phone. On the line, Liam's voice shook. "Please, I'll send a car. Come." I should have hung up. Instead, I went straight into the lion's den, straight into a living room filled with orchids, photographers, and a towering engagement cake. "You're back," Ava smirked from the sofa, IV taped to her arm like a halo. "But Liam is still mine." What the doctor revealed next made the room go silent. "Miss Whitmore," the hepatologist said, scanning Ava's chart. "Your medical history has never supported liver donation. You were contraindicated then, and you are contraindicated now." The air cracked. Mrs. Whitmore's manicured hand froze around her pearls. "But Ava saved Liam," she insisted. I cleared my throat. 3 years ago, someone else did," I said, voice steady. "No one met my eyes until Liam did." "2 transplants?" he murmured. "No," I said. "1 mine." Ava laughed, high and sharp. "Cute. The ex-con wants a medal." I didn't want anything from them. I only wanted the truth to finally stand on its own 2 feet, and it was about to. The Whitmore Gallery glowed like a shrine, wall-to-wall canvases, all signed S.G. "Serena Gray," Ava announced, chin high. "My favorite American painter." I knew those initials. I'd painted them in a sublet with a leaky radiator and a space heater that tripped the power every other night. I sold the early pieces for bus fare and groceries. Now one of them, my sunflower study, hung under track lights with a brass plaque that said "Property of Ava Whitmore." "You like it?" she asked. "Daddy bought it at auction." I smiled because my hands were shaking. What I brought in my tote would flip her perfect little provenance upside down. "Before dessert," I said, clearing my throat. "Could we do something quick? A live sketch?" A few guests clapped. I dragged an easel to the center of the room, tore a page from my pad, and began, long strokes, then short, then a knife-edge scrape to lift the light. I didn't think about them. I thought about the radiator, the subway screech, the way sun finds a chipped jar at 4 in the afternoon. 5 minutes later, the lines bloomed into the same sunflower gesture that hung on their wall. "Every artist has a fingerprint," I said, setting down the charcoal. "This is mine." What the head of security carried in next made even the pearls rattle. "Found these in Miss Ava's studio closet," he said, holding a slim flat box, my original thumbnails, edges still stained with turmeric tea. There was a beat of outrage, then a hush. "You broke into my space," Ava snapped. "No," he said calmly. "I followed your request to check for anything out of place. This was." Mrs. Whitmore's voice thinned. "Ava?" Ava's smile trembled, then snapped back on. "She'll say anything to ruin me." I didn't move. I just looked at Liam. "You asked who saved your life," I said. "You wanted the truth." What he answered told me whether we were a chapter or a cautionary tale. "I don't know what to believe," he admitted, voice raw, "but I know how it felt waking up. And the first name I said was yours." The room spun, soft then sharp. "Brooklyn," he said, stepping closer. "Come home and we'll sort it out." Home, the word pinched. "I never had one here," I said gently. "I cleaned one." "That's different." Cameras flashed. Someone whispered ex-con like it was a disease. Damien shifted toward me. "Car's outside," he murmured. "If you want to leave," and I nodded. Then a server rushed in, pale as the linen. "Miss Ava, she's fainted." What spilled from her purse when it hit the floor finally tore the costume seams. 2 amber vials skittered across the parquet, sedatives and vasodilators, labels peeled, pharmacy stamps blacked out. The hepatologist crouched first, eyes narrowing. "These thin blood," he said. "Combine them with stress, champagne, low food." He didn't finish. Mrs. Whitmore swayed. Mr. Whitmore steadied her with a shaking hand. "Ava," he whispered, "tell me this isn't what it looks like." Ava stared at me, then at Liam, calculating the nearest sympathy. "She planted them," she gasped. "She wants me gone." I lifted my empty hands. "I want the truth," I said, voice steady at last. And if they wouldn't open the door to it, I was ready to kick it off the hinges. The tabloids feasted on the Whitmore scandal for weeks. Heiress exposed, fake donor, real lies. I stayed off-grid in a borrowed studio in Brooklyn Heights, painting at night and leaving before sunrise. The news anchors said I'd escaped justice, but the only thing I'd escaped was their noise. One evening, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in a year. "Liam, please meet me at the bridge." The text read. I almost deleted it. Then I remembered the way his voice had cracked when he said my name. What waited under that bridge would prove whether redemption ever comes to people like us. He was already there, coat half-buttoned, wind cutting off the East River. "You were right," he said, handing me a folder. Inside were lab reports, notarized and dated. My blood type matched the donor's. "They confirmed it this morning," he whispered. "It was you." My throat closed. "You didn't believe me," I said quietly. He nodded. "I should have." His hands trembled. "Ava's gone. She left the city after the hearing." For the first time in years, I felt no rage, no satisfaction, just an emptiness too heavy to name. But the night wasn't finished with us yet. A scream echoed from the pedestrian walkway, metal against shoes, the skid of panic. A woman's silhouette clung to the outer rail. Even from a distance I knew that posture. "Ava!" I shouted, running. The icy wind turned her hair into ribbons of shadow. "Don't come closer," she cried. "You took everything." I stopped a few feet away. "No," I said. "You did. But it doesn't have to end like this." Her fingers slipped. Liam grabbed her wrist. Together, we pulled until she collapsed onto the bridge, sobbing. "Why did you save me?" she asked. "Because," I whispered, "someone has to stop the cycle." The next morning, the headlines weren't about her, they were about me. "Unknown artist prevents tragedy on the Brooklyn Bridge," the paper said. They used my alias, Serena Gray, and a grainy shot of me holding Ava under the amber streetlight. Suddenly, Collectors wanted the woman with the second chance. I opened my first solo show that fall in Soho, and for the first time, no one asked about my record, only about the light in my paintings. Liam stood by the door with a glass of champagne, smiling in that quiet way that said more than words. "You ready to forgive them?" he asked. I looked around. "Not yet," I said, "but I'm ready to forgive myself." And that, for once, felt like enough. When the crowd thinned, a small hand tugged my sleeve. A girl no older than 7, freckles bright under the gallery lights. "Miss Gray," she said softly, "my mom says you used to clean houses. Is that true?" I smiled. "Yes, it is," she nodded, eyes wide. "Then I can be an artist too." I crouched to her height. "You already are. Just promise me one thing, never let anyone tell your story for you." She grinned and ran back to her mother. I looked at the last canvas on the wall. A girl standing in front of a burning house, painting the sky gold instead of grey. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like the author. Would you like me to write the closing narration, final minute of voiceover, that ties this story emotionally for your video? Something cinematic and reflective, matching YouTube pacing and retention style? The gallery emptied slowly, leaving only the hum of the air vents and the faint echo of my own footsteps on the hardwood floor. Liam leaned against the window, watching the city lights flicker like restless fireflies. "You could stay here, you know," he said quietly. "No one's chasing you anymore." I walked toward the glass and looked out at Manhattan, its skyline cutting the night like a crown of silver. "I used to dream of belonging somewhere," I murmured. "But now I think belonging isn't a place, it's peace." He smiled faintly. "And do you have that?" I met his eyes. "Almost." What I told him next would finally close the book on all of it. "I'm leaving for New Orleans tomorrow," I said. "A museum offered me a teaching residency. Kids from foster care. They want me to show them how to paint without rules." Liam's smile dimmed, but his eyes warmed. "You always did belong to the wild ones." He reached into his coat and handed me a small wooden box. Inside was a sunflower pin made from broken paintbrush handles. "So you don't forget where it started," he said. I laughed through tears. "Oh, I could never forget." Then the gallery lights flicked off, and for a second the whole world felt quiet enough to breathe. But fate wasn't quite finished with its final reveal. The next morning, a thick envelope waited at my hotel door. No sender, only my name in looping cursive. Inside were medical records, custody papers, and a photograph of a baby wrapped in a pale blue blanket. On the back, in the same handwriting, "She's yours." My knees buckled. I hadn't seen that handwriting in over a decade. It was my birth mother's. For all these years, I'd chased a family who never wanted me, while the truth had been buried in some quiet southern town. I didn't even realize I was crying until the ink blurred the baby's face. And for the first time, my story wasn't about revenge. It was about beginning again. 2 weeks later, I stood on the porch of a small house outside Savannah, Georgia, paint-stained hands trembling as I knocked on the chipped white door. It opened to a soft-eyed woman with streaks of silver in her hair. "You must be Serena," she said. Her accent was gentle, like summer rain. Or should I say Sophia? I froze. "You knew?" She nodded. "Your mother wanted to tell you herself, but time ran out. She left you everything she could. This house, those papers, and that painting in the living room." I turned and saw it. The same sunflower, unfinished. The same one I'd been painting all my life. And in that moment I understood it had never been about them. It had always been about coming home to myself. As I hung my jacket by the door and felt the late afternoon light spill across the floorboards, I whispered a quiet goodbye to every name I'd worn. Brooklyn, Sophia, Serena, each one a version of me that had survived something. I picked up a brush from the table, dipped it into gold paint, and finished the last petal on my mother's sunflower. The house creaked softly, almost like a sigh. "It's done," I said aloud, and for once I didn't need anyone to believe me. I was free. Sometimes the world burns everything you know so you can rebuild what you truly are. Not the daughter they made up, not the girl they accused, but the woman who learned to start again. My name is Serena Gray, and this time the fire belongs to me. The paintbrush slid from my fingers and tapped softly against the wooden table. Outside, cicadas hummed, and the late summer air smelled like rain and honeysuckle. I stepped onto the porch and watched the light fade across the savanna marshes, turning everything bronze. For the first time in years, my chest didn't ache. I wasn't the girl begging to be believed, or the woman haunted by courtroom whispers. I was just me, breathing, standing, alive. Behind me, the house creaked again, as if the ghosts that lived here had finally decided to rest. And that's when I heard the knock on the door that would change everything again. When I opened it, Liam stood there, wind-tousled, out of place in a linen shirt and city shoes covered in red clay. "You found me," I said, half smiling. "Took a few wrong turns," he admitted, "but yeah, turns out you're terrible at hiding." He glanced past me at the easel inside. "You finished it," I nodded. "It was never really finished. I just needed to stop running from it." He hesitated, then stepped forward. "The board offered me a seat at the New Art Foundation. They want to fund programs for kids who never got a fair shot. Your idea." I blinked, stunned. Maybe this wasn't another ending after all. Maybe it was a bridge back to something real. We sat on the porch steps until the sky turned indigo. I told him about the letter, the child, the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. He listened, not interrupting once. "So," he said finally, "what now?" I smiled. "Now I paint, I teach, and I learn how to be someone's mother without losing myself." He reached for my hand. "And if I asked to stay?" I looked at the stars reflecting in the river. "Then stay," I whispered. "But this time it's not because you need saving. It's because we both deserve peace." And in that quiet, we let the world start over. Months later, the first Savannah Youth Art Center opened its doors. The walls were covered in messy, fearless color, paintings by kids who had nothing to prove to anyone. On the back wall, my original sunflower hung beside their work. No plaque, no signature, just light and brushstrokes. During the ceremony, one of the girls asked, "Miss Serena, what do we do when they call us names?" I knelt down and smiled. "You paint louder." The crowd laughed softly. I caught Liam's gaze across the room. He mouthed, "You did it." I shook my head. "We did." And somewhere I swear I felt my mother smile. That night, after everyone left, I turned off the lights and stood alone in the darkened studio. Outside, fireflies blinked over the water like tiny lanterns. I whispered to the air, to every version of myself that had ever fought to be seen, "We made it." The silence answered like a heartbeat. Then I opened the back door, stepped into the warm night, and walked barefoot into the grass, leaving faint golden footprints of paint behind me. Tomorrow, new kids would arrive, new stories would begin, and somewhere in that chorus of laughter and color, I knew I'd finally found home. They called me a liar, a criminal, a girl without a family. Maybe they were right back then, but every scar became a brushstroke, every mistake a color. And now when I paint, I don't paint to be forgiven. I paint because I survived. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the high studio windows, washing everything in a soft gold. I stood before a blank canvas, the smell of oil paint and turpentine mixing with fresh coffee. For years, blank space terrified me. It meant uncertainty, silence, the pause before the next heartbreak. But now it felt like freedom. I touched the brush to the canvas, and the first streak of color bled through, deep amber like the fires that once took everything from me. I smiled. "Not this time," I whispered. The past had burned me, yes, but it had also forged me. And this new painting wasn't about pain. It was about rebirth. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "Miss Serena?" I turned to see Liam, holding a newspaper and grinning like a proud conspirator. "You're on the front page again," he said, waving it. "From prison to palette, the artist who painted her way free." I laughed, shaking my head. "They make it sound like a fairy tale." He walked closer, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Maybe it is one," he said. "You just had to write your own ending." I met his eyes and smiled. "Or maybe it's just the beginning." Neither of us noticed the little girl watching us from the doorway, clutching a sunflower sketch to her chest. The girl stepped inside shyly. "Miss Serena, can I show you something?" she asked. I crouched beside her, and she opened a notebook filled with drawings. Tiny houses, stick figures, stars. "I don't have a mom or dad," she said, almost whispering, "but when I draw, I feel like they can see me." My throat tightened. "That's exactly what art does," I said softly. "It helps people find you, even the ones who are gone." She looked up. "Can I stay here and paint with you?" I smiled. "You already do, sweetheart." I gave her a brush, dipped it in yellow paint, and guided her hand. That little streak of light was the start of her own story, and maybe my second chance at motherhood. Later that evening, after the last child left, Liam turned off the lights and lingered in the doorway. "You know," he said, "I used to think redemption was something you earned. But watching you, it's something you give." I looked around at the drying canvases, each one glowing faintly under the lamplight. "I gave them color," I said. "They gave me purpose." He smiled. "Then I guess that makes us even." The night wind swept through the open window, carrying the sound of laughter from the street. "Not even," I said. "Grateful." Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't come from the ones who wronged you. It comes from what you build after they're gone. Months later, at a charity auction in New York City, one of my students' paintings, a simple field of yellow and blue, sold for $20,000. As applause filled the hall, I stood beside the little girl who painted it. "You see," I whispered, "your story matters." She smiled up at me, her eyes bright. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but I wasn't nervous. I wasn't running anymore. I was exactly where I was meant to be. The girl tugged my sleeve. "Miss Serena, what happens now?" I looked at her, at the crowd, at the sea of golden petals in the painting behind us. "Now," I said, "we start again. They said I was guilty. They said I'd never belong. But sometimes the truth doesn't scream, it paints. And in every color, I found a way to forgive, to begin and to be free. My name is Serena Gray, and this is my masterpiece."